Hello, everybody. Live stream, 1 p.m. Central. Here we go. Mario Edwards Jr. Mario Edwards Jr., not to be confused with Mario Edwards Sr., which they're not separated by all that much time. Mario Edwards Sr. Won a national championship with Florida State back in '99, and then Mario Edwards Jr. would go on to win a championship with Florida State. What was it, 2014? So Mario Edwards Sr. had Mario Edwards Jr. as a young man, and then instilled a whole lot of old school traits and philosophies in him. They actually talked about that, and that's going to be a running theme today because there's a few things about Mario Edwards that are very, very interesting. I'm actually excited to watch him this year. But here's Mario Edwards Jr. on a Seattle radio station. I've got the full link to the full interview below, but here's them talking before the Seahawks training camp last year, where Mario Edwards spent one season.
Pearson told me, I said, tell me something about Mario. He said, he's old school. What does that mean to you?
To me, I guess for me, like my dad, kind of growing up in that era, I'm just a physical person, man. All the whistles that they give and all the little, you can hit the quarterbacks like this and like that. I don't know how to play one way, and that's fast, one speed, and I ain't changing it. As long as I'm in the NFL playing, I'm going to play at the speed that I've always played at. So all that slowing down and pushing up and holding up, that's not me.
Remember, D'Amico, despite his pleasant demeanor and his chuckles in his press conferences, has so far gotten away with like enjoying having guys that push the envelope when it comes to hitting people. 2 of the 3 players suspended last year for unnecessary roughness played for the Texans at one point or another: Denzel Perryman and Kareem Jackson. So he fits the swarm mindset to that in that degree. I think that the thing when I watch Mario Edwards Jr., and I keep thinking this, if he had played in a 3-4 defense as a 3-4 defensive end his entire career, maybe 15 years ago, back when you used to align in a base front way more often before everything became about nickel and dime all the time, I think he could have been like an Aaron Smith for the Steelers back in the day. Remember Aaron Smith in the early 2000s? Didn't typically have more than 3 or 4 sacks in a season. I think Aaron Smith had one year where he had like 8 sacks, but for the most part, he was really good against the run, could rush the passer, but was very, very stout and strong and played with a lot of tenacity. That's what Mario Edwards Jr. reminds me of. He's played all over the line. 2 years ago with Tennessee, he played 3-4 defensive end. Had a good year there. Went to Seattle last year, and he played a majority defensive tackle in a 4-man front. So I think the Texans can use him in both regards. He's more of a potential defensive tackle, not the guy you want out there every week versus every personnel grouping as a defensive tackle, but in the right moments as a rotational player, I think he can do that. So yes, I'm gonna show you clips in the life of Colby. So right here, we'll watch Tennessee first. This is where he spent the majority of the year as a defensive end. One thing to keep in mind about him, he was originally drafted by the Raiders in the high second round, 35th pick overall, to be a 3-4 defensive end. Started off really well his rookie year, but then got injured. Had injuries his first couple years that kind of held him back, and then I think through the dysfunction and kind of turmoil in the Raiders, he got lost in the shuffle, and he's ended up playing for 6 different teams in the last 7 years. So he's been around. This will be his 30-year-old season. But this is some of his highlights from Tennessee, playing defensive end here, right defensive end. You can see that right there. That's a common theme. Again, like old school 3-4 defensive end, or like a guy that can stand dudes up and then shed and make the play. There's a level of physicality there that's really, really good. Swarm. This is a swarm. Anytime anybody hustles or makes a second move late in the play, I call it a swarm play. Like you can see right there, good play, not incredibly athletic, but knows how to play the angles, but can also get around the corner. Out wide as a defensive end. His hands in that separation against the run show up a lot, and that's something that D'Amico's really going to like. Right there, he's just strong. That wasn't athleticism or anything. That was just being able to hold up to the left tackle right there where a lot of guys might have gotten held or washed around. That's an old school 3-4 defensive end in a 4-eye. Like, even with bad footwork, locks out, puts the guy in the backfield. Stand up defensive end here. Lockout. Like most of his really good plays, you see that like fundamentally strong lockout.
How much?
We've heard from you guys already. We might play that again at the end there because he talks about his father. So old player and injured prone as well. Yeah, right. So this is the thing, Jason Ybarra. They're not signing him to be an every down defensive lineman. He's going to be a rotational player, and I think when you look at the composition of the defensive line right now, they've got a lot of these guys that either were maybe mismatches or poor scheme fits or just weren't in the right situation, and they just want to see how many guys they can get that pick up the scheme, that can compete in training camp. And with the expanded practice squads these days and everything else that goes into it, you want to have as many resources as possible. And I think they've got a lot of guys like Mario Edwards on the roster right now at defensive tackle specifically, for better or for worse. So you got a Swiss Army knife of different options. If we go to Seattle last year, so in Tennessee 2 years ago, he played the majority of his snaps at defensive end. You go to Seattle the next year and he plays the majority of his snaps inside as a defensive tackle. He was better for like a 285-pound guy. He was better against the run than I expected. He's not going to be your go-to option there. So let me pull this up. This might take a second. There's multiple moving parts here. And I would do really poorly on that S2 cognition test. The multiple moving parts get me. All right, here we go. Oh, that's my screensaver. Hold on a second, everybody. So this is Seattle versus the Andy Dalton-led Carolina Panthers. Remember, they gave Bryce Young a little break there. You need a little break. A little too much action for the little guy. Right there, right defensive tackle. This is not a textbook example of a great play. I just pulled 10 plays out of this game where he played 40 snaps. But in this scheme, poor footwork at the beginning there. He gets out of his gap, but he gets upfield and he gets penetration. And in an attack style front, you don't always have to hold your gap as long as you're forcing that running back to make a decision early in the down. And it ends up being a good play for the Seahawks. Right defensive tackle here. Starts off playing a little bit like a double team, but it's zone, but he holds his gap. Does a nice little a gentleman's hold there that's not going to get called for defensive holding. Here he was a right defensive tackle. Again, you see that lockout. And not all these are highlights at all either. I just wanted to show a few examples of how he played in this game. He came on strong towards the end of this game. Converts into power. Really put it on this left guard as the game went on. But here he's out in a wide 3-4-eye, but they're in a pass rush. Good swipe. Again, can turn the corner. Right defensive tackle here. Right defensive tackle here. Did a good job there of, I'm always a fan of guys that run games properly. And he does a good job here of first taking care of the left tackle. That way he occupies two, then turns his hips, gets to the quarterback. Here he is, the right defensive tackle again. Just a lot of steady upfield push. Not going to get 10 sacks in a season. Right here. That was a quick game. Right defensive tackle. Where are you here? There he is. Lined up way out wide. Good hands. I mean, he doesn't have great speed, but when he's going against a struggling draft pick there. Right defensive tackle here. This was his best. This was one of his more productive games. So let's see. Yeah, is a few of you have commented. Look, he's making 1 point, to address the last comment too. He's making $1.65 million this year. It's a 1 year, $1.65 million contract. Like, for bang for your buck, if he stays healthy, and can rotate in at times this season, he could be a very good value signing. I think there are a lot of guys that looked at Sheldon Rankins' contract that he ended up getting 2 years, $24 million with the Bengals. And Rankins was a more highly regarded guy to begin with, but he came to Houston and parlayed it into a better contract than he'd been offered the year before. And I think that this style of defense and playing for D'Amico for defensive linemen has some appeal like that. So Mario Edwards could have gone to multiple different places. I don't know if he was offered a lot more than he was by the Texans, but it's potentially a good thing. Let's see. We have a hockey line that stays fresh and dominates on the line. Whoever you end up with post camp, right? That's the thinking, is that you're gonna rotate a lot of guys in and out. If this is scouts and nice vest Nick spotlighting guys that D'Amico can work. Defense was weak link last year for sure. If this is scouts and nice vest Nick spotlighting guys that D'Amico can work. Boy, man, I wish you'd put some punctuation or hyphenation in there at some point. So I think you're saying, is this scouts and nice vest Nick spotlighting guys that D'Amico can work? I don't know what the hell you're talking about there, man. I don't know, Pinche Katie. I don't know. I'm happy to go live. In the building, good depth piece on the defensive line. Seems like defensive line will be run by committee. It will be always and forever. Like, it's the modern NFL. You're going to have 8 guys rotating in a 4-3 defense. So I think that if you're saying that as a negative, like, they've got 3 guys who are notable studs on the defensive line, and then they've got multiple other guys that produced last year or can produce this year. It's a defensive tackle position, I think, that you're probably talking about, because a defensive tackle, Danico Autry will be in there on passing downs or versus certain personnel groups. Likewise with Mario Edwards, I think he ends up being there versus 3 wide receiver sets and on passing downs as a defensive tackle. But there's lots of competition, and not all those guys are going to do it. Yeah, and as far as the highlighting, so I'm fascinated by this. Am I an idiot that I don't understand what you're saying here? No, I'm going through to point it out, I'm going through like every defensive lineman they signed, since it's dead time in sports news right now, and that's my area of somewhat expertise. I'm basically going through all these guys. So sorry, man. Pinche, explain yourself and edit that last text, because now it's gonna torment me all day long. Oh, here we go. Point being, if Nick and the scouts are finding players, okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. If Nick and the scouts are finding players that work for D'Amico versus D'Amico having to scout the players, no. I think it's a combination of all those things. Like, I think it's both these guys scouting players, but then also, like, Nick will say this over and over again, you don't really know what you have a guy until you get him into the building. So Nick tries very hard to be humble about his appraisals of guys, because he's been in the league long enough to know that sometimes you think you've got the perfect free agent scheme fit, and then it turns out he just flat out doesn't fit with either your system, your culture, or whatever it might be. So a lot of it is just getting guys in the building, as somebody had said earlier, and seeing how it works out. Okay, good. I'll be better now that Pinche, Katie, and I have come to an agreement. Rotation also helps us from, yeah. So I mean, to recap again. This time of year, yeah, I'm going to go through the defensive players. I'm going to take a look at all these guys. I'm not trying to act like he's going to be an all-pro. I don't think Nick expects Mario Edwards Jr. to be an all-pro all of a sudden in his 10th NFL season, but it's something that might be a part of the puzzle later on as we go on. Part of it, too, is, so with Mario Edwards, I look at him, and in my mind, because I played back then, when you go back to the early 2000s, and when you played a 3-4 defense, you were lined up in your base 3-4 a lot more than you are these days, because everybody's a nickel all the time these days. And then guys like Mario Edwards, had a lot more value and worth as run stoppers. And now he's just kind of caught in that spot where, okay, he was a perfect height and body weight for a 3-4 defensive end back in the day. But between J.J. Watt kind of destroying expectations at that position, and then all these freaks like Dexter Lawrence and Quinnen Williams and everybody else, not to mention Aaron Donald at defensive tackle these days, it's a different level of athlete when it comes to the true impact makers. And there's still a place for Mario Edwards, but it's at $1.65 million a year. Remember that. That's always key. Never forget the third dimension on all these contract evaluations or all these player evaluations. It's how much are we paying for this guy versus, like, say, having some rookie in there that you just don't trust. And I think ultimately with Mario Edwards, it boils down to I can trust that when he's in there, he's going to run the scheme. He can have an impact versus the run. He can provide push as a pass rusher. But more than anything, it's going to be as a spell to some of the guys who are your better pass rushers when you're coming down to third down and fourth down. The hockey line comment from earlier was very, very accurate. When it comes to defensive line, yeah, they treat them almost like a hockey line where guys go in and you bust your ass for 45 to 90 seconds, and then you get out and let fresher guys come in. You keep your studs out there a lot longer, but at defensive tackle, especially as pass rushers, sometimes just having fresh legs versus a big, dopey, stupid offensive lineman, that's better than anything. I'd rather have a guy with fresh legs in there at times than a gassed J.J. Watt or somebody like that. Let's see, out of respect, remember how Jacob Martin played tenacious till the end. Now imagine a whole team of Jacob Martins, but with household names. Yeah, that's the old, I'm always wary of that because I used to be one of those guys that a coach might say, Seth, if we had a team full of guys like you, we'd win the Super Bowl every year because I played hard all the time and all that stuff. But no, even as they were saying, I would accept the compliment. I'm not rude, but I would in my mind be like, no, you need a few just savage, ridiculously physically gifted assassins out there too. At least like 7 of them. And then a bunch of Seth Paynes. Then you're onto something. Let's see. Okay, the Freezing Tan said something funny, but now I gotta go up and find out what it is. All right, I'm gonna cut it short again because there's no news out there today, and I'm going through the guys on the roster right now. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Pinche and Katie. I'm glad we figured out what we were both talking about, and I look forward to watching Mario Edwards. I'm not going to adopt him the way I'm thinking about adopting some of the younger guys, but he's a guy to keep an eye on. I would have a beer with him as my brother-in-law, Mario Edwards Jr.